define herself and to define her agenda. And I do not begrudge nations that define themselves and their agenda. Ronald Reagan once said it, and I agreed with him, that every nation does what is in her best interest. And I have no problem with that. The problem that we have is that at critical moments in African history, we have failed to seize the moment. You will remember in 1917 at the Champaran campaign, Mahatma Gandhi told Charlie Andrews, I do not want you to participate because at this point in time, the Indians must believe that they can do it themselves. In other words, there comes a time in the history of a nation when even friends of goodwill must be told, keep aside. We want to believe that we can do it, and your help must be surreptitious and subterranean if you are a person of goodwill. And the Champaran philosophy is what we must define for ourselves. In the year 2005, the former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, put together 17 individuals in what was then called Our Common Interest, the report on the African Commission. The Prime Minister, he was then the President of the European Union, from which Britain has now left, and he was also the President of the G8 at that time before the exclusion of Russia. They produced a report. Right now, when I see the Blair Institute moving around Africa, they are implementing exactly what was in that particular report, and I have a copy of it, not for the benefit of Africa, but for the benefit of the Institute. And what they have done is to sugarcoat it and camouflage it for the purpose of hoodwinking Africa and for the purposes of creating an environment which benefits foreign companies to the detriment of the continent of Africa. So that some of these engagements are anodinal. They simply lull us into a false sense of security. Do I blame them? No. That is why I agree that we must decolonize all learning. I don't know who said it, that if you have that the happiness of the slave is the comfort of the slave owner. And I'm saying that if Africa does not recognize this, then Africa will never recognize and realize our potential. The saying goes that if you behave like grass, goats will eat you. And many times we in the African continent behave like grass, and we are fit for eating. And that is what I'm saying, going forward in a strategic engagement such as this, it is incumbent upon the continent of Africa. And remember, I said there is a new scramble, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. There was 1 month in this continent when the Russian foreign minister was here, the American foreign minister was here, the Chinese foreign minister was here, the French president was here, the Turkish president was here, within a period of 2 weeks. What were they looking for? What is in their best interest? They engaged little countries. They don't want to engage the East African community. They don't want to engage SADC. They don't want to engage ECOWAS, because when they are big, they are not manipulable. And when on the 14th and 15th days of last year, the African heads of states and government were summoned, and I use the word summoned very deliberately, to Washington, D.C. After the president had spoken to them and given them photo ops, Africa was given 60 billion, 54 countries, 60 billion. And then the American president started engaging in bilateral agreements with Burundi, with Lesotho, with Kenya. That is what we are saying, that going forward we must be conscious. And as to training, our own Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in a book called The River Between, tells his lead character Wayaki, go unto him, learn what he has taught you, but bring it home and customize it for the benefit of our people. Learning is universal and defies geography. but there is wisdom in using that learning for our benefit. And very lastly, how do we distinguish the institutional conceptual West, which is diabolical, and the individual members of those countries that actually sometimes are on our side? Institutionalized conceptual West, as articulated through government, is fundamentally diabolical, their pretension to the contrary notwithstanding. And therefore, when we engage with them, we must have our guards up. We are capable, in my view, of discerning who is better, and that is the duty of our leadership. Our leadership doesn't do a good job out of it, and that is why the demand from the civil society, the demand from academia must remind leadership at all times, you are dining, and I'm using this as a term of art, that when you are dining with the devil, you must do so with a long spoon. Thank you. Let us not drown ourselves in semantics. This is my view with due respect. First of all, let us remember that, and I always warn us Africans, if I was using my mother tongue to define interference, or using a Kiswahili word, what meaning would it carry? And sometimes we find ourselves prisoners of Portuguese, prisoners of French, prisoners of English or any other colonial language which we have appropriated and which we now deploy in terms of engagement. History has demonstrated, and my good friend Kegoro said it, history has demonstrated not once, not twice, that the intentions appear to be noble in the beginning, but when they have come in like the proverbial Trojan horse, they go beyond their mandate. Show me what is happening to Libya today. Show me what is happening to the Central African Republic. Show me what is happening to Somalia today. They were all well-intentioned, and see the product. A tree shall be judged by its fruit. A mango that says it is an orange is still a mango. That is, what can Africa do, particularly with foreign interference? Let us understand that the international economic architecture, as I see it, is one in which Africa did not participate, does not participate in a meaningful way. Take, for example, the Bretton Woods institution that we know about, the World Bank and the IMF. Created in 1944 in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, British economists and American economists immediately after the World War II to target the reparation of Europe through the Marshall Plan. We are grafted into it, and then we become beholden to them. So that when you hear IMF is in your country, you ought to be very worried, because the prescriptions is one size fits all. And if you doubt me, you will remember the prescriptions of the IMF during the structural adjustment in 1980s. Not a single country came out of it in a proper shape. We are not involved in that architecture. Remember also the WTO. The very first meeting of the United Nations in 1945 in San Francisco had a component of the WTO. The WTO, as we know it today, is also constructed in a manner that does not benefit us. The idea is that Africa continues to remain a producer of primary goods, and we continue to consume goods that have value addition. How then has Africa tried to react to this? There have been several initiatives. The very early initiatives were not even constructed by Africa. If you remember the African Pacific, Caribbean Pacific, the Lomé Convention, and the Cotonou Declaration, these were initiatives which were influenced from outside. It is after the failure of the Lomé Convention that Africa now said, we want to have our own, hence the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980, because Africa recognized trade within Europe is at almost 60%. Trade within North America is at anything 57%. Trade within Asia is at 50%. Trade within Latin America is at 40%. Trade within Africa, 15%. But the Lagos Plan of Action did not realize the dreams that we set for ourselves. So Africa has always identified the solution to our problem. In fact, and the president of the commission, or the chairman commission, will agree with me. If you listen to Kwame Nkrumah when he spoke on 24th day of May 1963, he said, the only way in which we are going to ensure that we survive in this hostile world is to have one government. Perhaps some said he was naive, he was too idealistic, but he could see it. He could see that the smaller we are, the weaker we are in all aspects. He said, even one army, even one foreign policy, he said, and people thought he was naive. In 2013, when we came up with Africa Agenda 2063, and I invite you to read the letter written by Nkosazana and Dlamini Zuma, from whom the president took over. She's apologizing to Kwame Nkrumah. She's saying, we wish we listened to you. So what are we doing as Africa in terms of trying to deal with this foreign interference? Having recognized these, first of all, under the REX, the East African Community, you remember there was the Committee of Fast Tracking of the East African Community and East African Confederation. The first president of East Africa ought to have been sworn in 2010. It did not happen. As I'm talking to you, there is now a body that is moving around trying to create a constitution for the East African Confederation, which is a realization that if we want to interfere, if we want to stop foreign interference and we want to engage constructively, we must have a big market, and that market will be the East African market. Hence, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Somalis are coming in, and I'm told the Ethiopians are also contemplated. And not only in East Africa, in ECOWAS, there was even an attempt to create a currency called the ECO, which was torpedoed, as you know, by the French. And in SADC, these are ways and means of immunizing ourselves against the machinations of not only Europe, but China. China is increasingly coming into the continent. Russia is increasingly coming into the continent. Turkey is increasingly coming into the continent. Qatar is increasingly coming into the continent. The Emiratis are coming into the continent. So we are seeing all these things happening. But beyond the REX, there is also the African Union. If you read Africa Agenda 2063 and the 7 aspirations, they are designed specifically to ensure that we form a bulwark against these foreign interference. And let me correct myself if I was misunderstood. They are small nations. Let's not delude ourselves. The theory of sovereignty of nations is a fiction. Right now, we will have meeting of the G7. Why? Because they are bigger economies and we are not there. Then we will have the G20, which are slightly bigger. Then they are the smaller nations and they met recently in Brussels. So we must distinguish the fiction of equality of nations and the reality of nations. And when therefore we want to negotiate at the continent of Africa, we are saying the bigger we are, the better we are. So efforts are there. And as I conclude, I'm saying, if we look at Agenda 2063 and we look at Africa Continental Free Trade Area to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers, to allow for the free movement of persons, then we would be in a better position to engage. And I'll give this example. Look at East Africa. We said that we did not want second-hand clothing. Rwanda accepted. Then Uganda and Tanzania were persuaded by the United States of America, and we dropped out. This is what divide and rule is all about. So these things that we are talking about, they are not going to be realized in your lifetime. These are intergenerational battles. And our duty, as Nyerere said on the 6th day of March 1997, This generation has a duty to carry the torch. And the worst mistake that we can make is to lose hope and to despair. Thank you.